We all know how Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, but nobody talks about what happened to the garden itself. Did it disappear? Was it destroyed? Or is it still out there, hidden in plain sight? The only clear detail the Bible gives us is that Eden was guarded. But why would God protect a place he never wanted humans to enter again? And what exactly was inside that was worth guarding for thousands of years? This is Secret Origins, and today we're talking about what truly happened with the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve left. After the fall, the Garden of Eden did not disappear, at least not right away. According to the book of Genesis, Eden still existed after Adam and Eve were sent out, but it was now closed to them forever. Genesis 3:24 describes what happened next. God placed cherubim at the east of the garden, along with a flaming sword that turned in every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. This was the last time the Bible describes anyone seeing Eden. The tree of life was still there. It still held the power to grant immortality. But humanity was now cut off from it. The gate was sealed, and the way back was blocked by divine command. And there are several possible answers to why this was done. One is known as the mercy theory. In this view, the banishment was not simply a punishment, but an act of compassion. If Adam and Eve had eaten from the tree of life after they had sinned, they would have been trapped in an eternal state of corruption. They would live forever, but in separation from God. Death, in this sense, became a way for humanity to be freed from sin in the end. Another explanation is the symbolic theory. According to this idea, being unable to return to Eden was meant to be a constant reminder of what had been lost. Adam and Eve may have known where the garden was. They may have seen its beauty from a distance, but they could never enter it again. The sight of it would always point back to the life they could have had if they had remained obedient. A third possibility is the false hope theory. This theory says that if Adam and Eve had been allowed to approach the tree again, they might have believed they could undo their own mistake. They could have thought that by eating the fruit they could save themselves. But salvation was never going to come from human effort, only from God. The banishment closed the door on that idea. The presence of the cherubim is also important. In the Bible, cherubim are not soft, childlike angels. They are powerful beings who serve as throne guardians for God. In the Ark of the Covenant, 2 golden cherubim stood over the mercy seat, the place of God's presence. In the visions of the prophet Ezekiel, cherubim are described as radiant, multi-faced beings who move like flashes of lightning. At Eden, their job was to guard the way to the tree of life. But some ancient interpretations suggest they did more than that. According to these views, the cherubim were also responsible for keeping Eden hidden from humanity. The garden may have still existed somewhere on Earth, but it was placed beyond human reach. From this point on, the Old Testament no longer speaks directly about the garden. There are no further historical details, no description of its fate, and no record of anyone entering it again. It disappears from the narrative, leaving only the memory of a perfect place now sealed away. Yet many theologians and historians were not satisfied with the little the Bible reveals or leaves unsaid about Eden's fate, and over time, they developed their own explanations and answers. All tried to explain why paradise never shows up again in the story. One of the oldest ideas comes from early Jewish and Christian readers. The Great Flood erased Eden from the earth. The logic is simple. The flood in Genesis is global in scope. Mountains are covered, rivers change course, valleys fill, coastlines shift, and the land is reshaped. If even the high places were underwater, then a garden, no matter how special, could not escape the surge. Supporters point to 2 key reasons. First, the loss of perfection after the fall. Before sin, creation is described as very good. After sin, everything starts to change. In that world, the perfect order of Eden is now out of step. According to this view, when the flood comes, it doesn't just judge human evil. It also wipes away the last untouched remnant of that earlier order. The garden, as it was, no longer fits a corrupted creation. Second, the flood's power to reset geography. Floods move rock, soil, and entire riverbeds. The Garden of Eden is associated with a river that went out of Eden and split into four. After a planet-shaping event, those waterways could be gone or unrecognizable. In other words, even if the land where Eden once stood still exists, its features would be changed beyond recognition. There's also a spiritual reason that makes sense to many believers. If the way to the tree of life was guarded to prevent eternal life in a fallen state, then the final removal of the garden during the flood matches the moral purpose already in place. Another explanation is less dramatic, but just as compelling. The Bible says that Adam was placed in the garden to work it and take care of it. When Adam and Eve were banished, no one was left to tend it. Without a caretaker, even the most beautiful garden can fall into decline. Over time, plants would grow wild, weeds would choke the pathways, and fruit trees would rot or be overtaken by invasive species. Animals would return, changing the balance of the land. Supporters of this theory believe that Eden could have simply blended back into the surrounding wilderness, becoming indistinguishable from any other part of the earth. Eventually, centuries of wind, rain, and shifting terrain would have erased any sign that this was once the home of humanity's first parents. Some interpreters link this idea to the curse described in Genesis 3:18, where God tells Adam, "Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you." In other words, once humanity was expelled, the earth itself would resist their efforts, producing weeds and hardship instead of effortless abundance. Without Adam and Eve's daily care to tend and protect the garden, even Eden's perfect balance could have been overtaken by the wild, untamed forces of nature, vines covering the paths, trees growing out of control, and thorns choking the flowering plants. Over time, the garden might have blended back into the surrounding wilderness, becoming unrecognizable as the paradise it once was. The third explanation is one of the most mystical. It suggests that Eden was never destroyed at all. Instead, it was removed from the physical earth and placed somewhere else entirely. Some ancient Jewish and Christian traditions taught that after Adam and Eve were expelled, God transferred the Garden of Eden to heaven. In this view, Eden still exists in perfect condition, but it's now in a dimension that humans cannot access in our current state. Supporters of this theory often point to later passages in the Bible where paradise is described not as something lost forever, but as something that still exists and will be experienced again. For example, when Jesus speaks to the thief on the cross, he says, "Today you will be with me in paradise." This suggests that paradise is a real place, still present somewhere, and accessible to the righteous after death. The Book of Revelation strengthens this idea by describing the tree of life as standing in the New Jerusalem, a restored world where God dwells with humanity. If the tree of life will one day be available again, then Eden's most sacred elements must have been preserved rather than destroyed. In this way, the relocation theory ties the past and the future together. Eden was humanity's first home, removed from earth to protect it from corruption. But in the end times, according to this belief, it will return as part of God's restored creation, and the separation between humanity and paradise will finally be over. Although the idea that the Garden of Eden was somehow relocated to a heavenly realm might sound like one of the most far-fetched theories, but it is also the one that seems to have an unexpected ally: modern science. In recent years, concepts from quantum physics and the study of multiple dimensions have offered striking metaphors for what ancient texts describe as a hidden or veiled paradise. While science does not speak about Eden directly, it does explore ideas of parallel realities, worlds that exist in the same space and time as ours, but which we cannot normally perceive. In quantum theory, there is a principle called superposition, which means that a particle can exist in multiple states or locations at the same time until it is observed. Similarly, there is the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that every possible outcome of an event exists in a separate parallel reality. If we borrow this as a metaphor, it becomes easier to imagine how Eden could continue to exist, not in some far-off galaxy, but right here, only in a dimension our senses cannot detect. Science offers one possible model for this in the concept of frequency. Just as a radio can only pick up a station when it is tuned to the right wavelength, our human perception might be tuned to the physical world we live in, while Eden could exist at another frequency entirely. In this view, paradise is simply vibrating at a level we cannot reach. This idea also aligns with biblical passages about opened heavens, moments when certain individuals are suddenly able to perceive a reality that is normally hidden. In the book of Ezekiel, for example, the prophet describes the heavens opening and seeing visions of God. Such experiences are rare, but they hint at the possibility that our world and the spiritual world are not as separate as we think. In fact, they may be layered over each other. Some early Christian and Jewish mystics believed Eden occupied a middle realm, neither fully physical nor fully spiritual, which could be entered only by those granted divine permission. In that sense, the cherubim's flaming sword might be less about physically blocking an entrance and more about maintaining a spiritual boundary. And here is where the theory becomes even more fascinating. Across centuries, there have been accounts of individuals from different parts of the world, monks, shamans, mystics, and visionaries, who claim to have glimpsed a perfect, otherworldly garden. These people often lived lives of extreme discipline, prayer, or meditation, and many traditions describe them as having higher vibrations or being in an elevated state of consciousness. In modern terms, some might describe this as altering the brain's perception, perhaps allowing them to tune in to a reality that is normally beyond reach. Whether through spiritual practice, fasting, or deep contemplation, they seem to experience moments where the veil between worlds grew thin, and in many of these accounts, the place they described shared striking similarities with the biblical Eden. This brings us to an intriguing possibility. What if many of these different visions, separated by centuries and cultures, were all of the same place? Perhaps what one tradition called a hidden paradise was what another called the otherworld, the land of eternal spring, or the island of the blessed. And for those in the Judeo-Christian tradition, that place would be the Garden of Eden. We can see this pattern in various religious and mythological traditions. In ancient Celtic myths, there is the idea of Tir na Nog, the land of the young, a place of beauty and immortality, invisible to ordinary mortals. In Buddhist cosmology, there are hidden realms like Shambhala, accessible only to the enlightened. In Islamic tradition, there is Jannah, a paradise of gardens and rivers, described in ways that echo the Eden narrative. So if Eden does exist as a parallel reality, this would also explain why it remains consistent in descriptions, even when coming from vastly different backgrounds. In support of this idea, there are historical records and accounts from prophets, saints, explorers, and travelers, all claiming to have seen, or at least glimpsed, the garden. One of the earliest comes from the Apocalypse of Baruch, a Jewish text from the 2nd century. In it, the prophet Baruch writes, that he was shown the place where Adam was and the tree that will blossom again in the age to come. He recognizes this as Eden, but Eden was separated from the human world. Baruch doesn't describe walking through its gates. Instead, it is presented as a vision, a place visible to him only by divine revelation. Centuries later, in the 4th century, we hear of Saint Macarius of Egypt, one of the most revered desert fathers. Living a life of prayer and solitude in the Egyptian wilderness, Macarius was said to have received visions of Adam's garden. In one story, he sees an angel standing at its entrance, the same kind of guardian described in Genesis, preventing him from entering. Around the 6th century, the legendary Irish voyager Saint Brendan the Navigator appears in Celtic Christian tradition. In the tales of his long sea journey, Brendan discovers a lush and perfect garden from which flows a great river that divides the world. One of the monks traveling with him tells Brendan that this is none other than the Garden of Eden. The description matches biblical imagery, a paradise watered by a central river that splits into 4, just as Genesis describes. But not all accounts come from saints or prophets. In medieval legends of Alexander the Great, known as the Alexandrides, there is a striking episode. Journeying to the farthest eastern edge of the known world, Alexander reaches what is called the Gates of Paradise. Beyond them, he sees a light that does not come from the sun and breathes a fragrance unlike anything on earth. The gates remain closed to him, and a voice tells him he cannot enter. While this story may be legendary, the imagery of radiant light and an inaccessible garden bears a familiar resemblance to Eden's guarded entrance. Moses himself is also associated with visions of paradise in certain Jewish and Christian mystical traditions. In Midrashic writings and later Kabbalistic interpretations, some say that during his time on Mount Sinai, Moses was shown not only the heavenly throne, but also the place where the tree of life is kept. For these interpreters, this was a rare look at Eden, not as it once was on earth, but as it exists now, preserved and beyond human reach. The last of our notable travelers is Sir John Mandeville, a 14th century writer who penned a famous travel account. While many historians debate the accuracy of his stories, his description of a land in the east claimed by locals to be near paradise is intriguing. He speaks of high walls that no one can cross and of people who insist they have seen the garden's outer boundaries. In Mandeville's account, Eden is not a myth but a physical place, still present somewhere in the world, though impossible to reach. From the visions of prophets to the journeys of saints, and from the writings of ancient Jewish mystics to medieval adventure tales, the pattern is hard to ignore. And still, many people do not see the Garden of Eden and the cherubim simply as part of a story about loss. Instead, they view them as part of a much greater test. In this view, Eden and the cherubim at its gates are keepers of a spiritual challenge. According to this interpretation, the cherubim's role is twofold. First, they maintain the concealment of Eden, ensuring that no one can stumble into it by accident. Second, they preserve it for the future, guarding its purity until the day humanity is ready to enter again. This makes Eden not just a paradise lost, but a paradise waiting. Some mystical traditions go further, suggesting that Eden has been repurposed into a kind of spiritual testing ground. The idea is that in life, people are continually faced with moral decisions, opportunities to prove their worth, their integrity, and their devotion to God's principles. Only those who live in alignment with those principles will be ready when the gates of Eden open again. In this sense, the flaming sword is a symbol of the separation between innocence and corruption, between what we are now and what we must become. The symbolism here is powerful. The cherubim's watch ensures that humanity cannot take shortcuts back to innocence. In the biblical account, Adam and Eve's sin was not just disobedience. It was the attempt to grasp something they were not yet ready for. This alternative view suggests that re-entering Eden must happen in the opposite way, through patience, growth, and transformation, not through force or trickery. In Jewish mysticism, there are stories of Eden functioning as a place where the faithful, upon death, might be permitted to enter. Christian mystics have written about a restored paradise for those purified through faith and works. Even in Islamic tradition, there are descriptions of a heavenly garden prepared for the righteous, echoing the Eden of Genesis. This idea also connects to the concept of Eden gradually expanding. In some mystical writings, Eden is not static but growing, reaching outward like the dawn. The belief is that as more souls are made pure, the garden itself becomes more accessible, until one day it will merge again with the human world. In this view, the cherubim are not wardens of a prison, but custodians of a promise, holding the garden in trust for the moment of humanity's reconciliation with God. So, when will we be able to return to Eden? The Bible itself offers glimpses of an answer, painting a picture of a time when the barriers will be lifted and paradise will be restored. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet describes a renewed world where the desert shall rejoice and blossom, where predators and prey live in peace, and where suffering and death no longer have power. For many, Isaiah is speaking about the Messianic age, a time when the harmony of Eden will return, not as a memory, but as a living reality. The book of Revelation takes this even further. In its final chapters, it describes the New Jerusalem, a radiant city where God dwells among his people. Flowing through the center of this city is the river of the water of life, and on either side stands the tree of life, bearing fruit for the healing of the nations. This is a direct echo of Eden, showing that the story of the garden is not over, but will find its fulfillment in the future. Some mystical traditions expand on this idea, claiming that Eden is not a static place frozen in time, but a living reality that is gradually expanding. They argue that the garden is preparing itself for humanity's eventual re-entry, its borders stretching outward like ripples in a pond, waiting for the day when heaven and earth will be fully united again. For Christians, this hope is directly linked to the work of Christ. Through his death and resurrection, he broke the curse of sin that began with Adam and Eve. In Christian theology, redemption is not only about saving souls, but about restoring all of creation to its intended perfection. The New Jerusalem described in Revelation is, in many ways, Eden reborn, but this time it is permanent and incorruptible. For Jewish tradition, the return to Eden is deeply tied to the messianic hope of world renewal. In this vision, the Messiah will bring an era of peace, justice, and divine presence on earth. The land will be restored, the exiles will return, and humanity will live once more in harmony with God and creation, just as it was in the beginning. So yes, the Garden of Eden is both the first home of humanity and, for many, its final destiny. The Bible begins with Eden, and in a way, it ends with it too. The story comes full circle, promising that what was lost will one day be found again, and the path that was closed will one day open for those who are ready to walk it. And maybe, in the end, it doesn't even matter which theory is correct. Whether Eden was destroyed, hidden, or moved into another dimension, it continues to stand for the same things: a perfect world, untouched by corruption, the deep human longing for restoration, and the hope that paradise will one day be opened once more. So what do you think? Is the Garden of Eden gone forever? Or is it still out there, waiting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch the video on screen next. Keep your minds open. And until we meet again,